This is the Golden Lotus dance, and it is found almost nowhere else in the world. Here, in Yunnan province in southwestern China, are sufficient dancers with bound feet. It is nearly a century since the custom of foot binding was banned by China's first Republican government. There are no official statistics as to how many bound-footed women remain among China's 1.25 billion citizens. Today, it is almost impossible to comprehend the reasoning behind this strange and brutal custom.
疼嘛，疼了，这个那是受不了的，小嗲嗲的，一不像现在大胖哥。
过了疼才能呢。
一瞅瞅那些，那训都训不着。
我们这个就是地的，过世那来干哈都会走路了。
At its peak, foot binding was a socially mandatory practice for Han women throughout China, rich or poor alike. The village of Liuyi in Yunnan province. With around 300 bound-footed women in the vicinity, there are 104 in this village alone, and all are aged between 70 and 90. These old women, who have lived in this village for most of their lives, are the final chapter in the history of foot binding. "77-year-old Lo Yuyuan and 80-year-old Chai Fuyuan are in-laws. Lo's feet were bound at the age of 5, and she was married at the age of 14. She has 2 sons and 1 daughter. Chai, the smaller of the 2 women, had her feet bound when she was only 4, and was also married at 14. She has 1 son and 4 daughters.
所以意思大家讲，一岁的你看们4岁5岁不嫁过，不过我们那小的说啊，做个娘生些姑娘，待会觉得比别啥过，是大的比幼稚啊。你发过的小妹发好。
娘们说不过小没有了在哪？娘们就要他们过小。
The custom was carried out with a binding bandage made of coarse cotton cloth, measuring 3 inches in width and 7 or 8 feet in length. This is a foot-binding stool of the Qing dynasty. The child of a wealthy family would sit on a bed with her feet placed on the stool. The special roller was used to tighten the binding bandage. Inside the little drawers were scissors, perfume, and alum, all essential for the beautifying ritual. Customs varied from province to province. Foot binding was initiated at the age of 4 for some, or as late as 8 for others, and was usually performed by the girl's own mother, although wealthy families would engage the services of a binding woman. For parents, believing that foot binding had a lifelong impact on their daughter's future wealth and social standing, and therefore happiness, picking an auspicious day for the event was important.
过端阳节，过我们那说包粽子，我们就是端阳节过得多。
谁得吃那么的过得小呢？谁不得吃那么的过不小了？
From what we see now only as the astonishing mutilation that resulted from foot binding, it is difficult to remember that for the Chinese, it was once thought of as the height of sensuality. All the toes except the big one were folded under and bound tightly to bring them close to the sole. The feet were known as golden lotuses only if they were 3 inches long, silver if they were 4 inches long, or iron if they were more than 4 inches long.
我睇了没？睇没口才那呀？你口才那么明病噶？啊，姑娘。
Feet were bound in 5 or 7 layers of bandages. Often mothers would sew up the punishing bindings in order to prevent their daughters from secretly removing them in bed at night. As the feet grew, so the bindings were tightened.
会么呢？说么前么过状到回笼之间么插了油么轻轻的过，轻轻的过了嘛，还是晚上也是不耐烦，还是给你那个床前么个睡个，睡不到回来好洗了好我们还是一过。
For over 1,000 years, countless Chinese girls were disabled or even died during the course of this practice. Often the feet were broken. Paralysis, gangrene and ulcers were commonplace. Girls in the early stages of foot binding would have their bandages tightened twice a day. The pain was excruciating and unrelenting for up to 2 years before gradually subsiding, leaving the foot permanently contorted. Only then could the human foot become the ultimate symbol of beauty. The golden lotus. Chai is 5 feet 1 inch tall. An average woman of her height has a 9-inch long foot. But Chai's deformed little foot measures only 5. All the toes except the big one, which still protrudes, are deformed and bent, hidden under the sole. And the 2 smallest toes have been completely disabled. The instep has been bent to form an arch. The bridge bulges markedly, and a cleft has been formed in the middle of the sole. The joint between the foot and the heel is fractured. Because of this severely restricted growth, the lower legs of bound-footed women are incredibly thin. So why was it considered a symbol of beauty? The answer to this question can be traced back to a peculiar style of imperial entertainment some 1,000 years ago. It is generally believed among the Chinese that foot binding originated in the 10th century, during what is known as the Epoch of 5 Dynasties. It is said that ruler Li Yu of the Southern Tang dynasty doted on a palace concubine, Yao Niang, who was a superb dancer. The emperor demanded that Yao Niang wrap her feet in cloth to make them smaller and look like moon crescents. He further made the concubine dance on a specially made lotus stage. The spectacle so seduced the emperor that the royal obsession escalated into a craze and permeated through the imperial courts, becoming ever more extreme as it did so and inspiring art and literature as it went. By the 11th century onward, foot binding had become the fashionable norm among women of the imperial and noble families. The practice spread as the lower classes strove to imitate their peers. The beautiful dancer was soon forgotten, leaving millions of women with fractured feet so badly distorted that some could barely walk, let alone dance. According to Gao Hongxin, formerly a research student at the University of Fudan in Shanghai and author of A History of Foot Binding, proponents of the golden lotus ideal over the generations set up a 7-word beauty standard for women's bound feet.
蟾蜍时代，我们所谓的小脚之美呢，包括7个要点，就是瘦小、尖弯、相稳正。
In the 1930s, Tianfeng newspaper from Tianjin ran a special column on sensual small feet. The articles were later compiled under the title Qai Fei Liu and included doggerel in praise of women's tiny feet, paper cuttings of lotus shoes, and even men's erotic thoughts and experiences playing with women's miniature feet. It is difficult to understand why a custom that imposed such physical torture on women was passed down so readily from generation to generation. The major reason was its inextricable association with marriage. 72-year-old Fu Enchan and 69-year-old Xiao Xiaofeng never met until they were married.
小媳妇们啥要小脚啊，大脚们不是呀，其实主要是俺姐我们做小脚。 我们穿的脚们是比较也，可能现在也很不可，我们都把我们就是靠，男人领了着。
The fact that men would only marry women with small feet meant that women were doubly constrained. They were either outcasts if their feet were unbound, or cripples if they were. In a blind marriage like this, a girl's beauty and desirability were counted more by the size of her feet than the beauty of her face. Matchmakers did not ask, is she beautiful, but how small are her feet? A plain face was given by heaven, but poorly bound feet were a sure sign of laziness.
一直到订婚以后，苗苗的人的几个偷偷的看，当时我觉得好看，
现在呢？
现在也觉得好看。
现在也觉得好看。
These miniature golden lotus shoes, only half an inch long, were hanging ornaments at weddings. Red golden lotus shoes were an essential part of the dowry. The family of the bride would take immense trouble to make some 40 to 50 pairs of embroidered golden lotus shoes, which would then be placed in large boxes and taken out for appreciation by friends and relatives after the bride arrived at the groom's home. The small feet of the bride would be the center of everyone's attention, and the groom would pride himself on having married a woman with perfect feet.
到现在随他们年轻一代们，可以说是最标准的。这标准就说是第一个是小，第二个是走在。
In the late Qing dynasty, the early 20th century, many Western missionaries came to China, and the foot-binding custom of the Han women was deemed cruel and barbaric. Ideas against foot-binding were propagated in private and public schools. In 1912, the Republic of China was established, and all provinces were ordered to put a stop to the practice of foot-binding. However, as late as 1936, a small number of women remarkably still volunteered to undergo the torture of foot-binding. Xia Xiaofang was one of them. At the time, she was only 4.
我疼的嘛，疼啊啥过？我是喜欢过小脚，小脚好看，而且们是过了小脚，我们啥穿裙子啊，穿的裙子嘛，个裙子上面一细嘛，穿缎子哈，缎子的啥，头上面大花，我就喜欢过小脚，那个。
Xiao comes from a wealthy family. Her grandmother, mother, aunt, cousin, and elder sister all had their feet bound. Being part of the last generation to have their feet bound, Xiao took foot binding for women for granted. At the risk of punishment by the government, Xiao, who was very concerned about her appearance, bound her feet secretly.
就我的哥哥好看脚，我就是喜欢就过起来了嘛，那个就不敢，你那拿脚。 啊，发油发弄，但是，过了好几年过去了，做一些放脚哈，做一些，你们那个比那个宽下饭，我做一些放脚哈，么拿起么穿了袜子，么就，把脚就干哦，等到都没有烤，么我就过去了。
Now, with the pain behind her, Xiao still believes that it was the beauty of her tiny feet that brought her a good marriage. Happily married for 53 years, the couple have their own farm. They have 3 sons, 3 daughters, and 6 grandchildren. Amazingly, Xiao's 5-inch foot is the same size as that of her 3-year-old granddaughter. It is a source of great pride for her. Xiao is well known for her small feet and has become something of a celebrity in the villages around Tonghai County. The fascination with this extreme beauty has an ancient origin in China's history. According to the yin-yang theory, men are yang or strong, while women are yin or gentle. With bound feet, a woman had no option but to teeter fragilely. a stance that was likened to that of a tender young willow in the breeze. Professor Liu Dailin, who has studied Chinese sexuality for 20 years, believes that foot binding was closely related to sex.
他们一方面觉得这个小脚非常小，像玩具一样的啊，这个摸这个小脚呢，能够激发性的兴趣，认为能够使女性的阴部收缩，收缩了以后呢，有利于性交吧，就是男人能够通过性交获得更大的快感。
While this argument is not supported by medical evidence, it was a commonly held belief that a bound-footed woman's naked feet were the pinnacle of sensuality. Women's intimate personal belongings like binding bandages and golden lotus shoes were kept strictly away from men. To work as a prostitute, it was essential to have bound feet. Men would not consider an unbound woman as sexually exciting. Chai Fei Liu tells how this prostitute, born in Tianjin, earned the nickname Little-Footed Queen because of her charming and experienced small feet. This lotus chart records how prostitutes ranked in a small-foot beauty contest. In the past, bound-footed women rarely left their homes. Today, they try to make their names with their little feet. Every morning, elderly women will be found playing ground ball in the Sports Association for the Elderly in Liuyi village. The closer the big wooden ball gets to the small red ball, the higher the score. There are 10 points in each game. The ground ball team was formed 4 or 5 years ago. All the team members are women with bound feet. They represented Tonghai County in a provincial ground ball competition and were second runner-up. They have apparently got used to the pain and inconvenience caused by their partial disability. A Chinese saying states, "A pair of small feet, a bowl of tears." Bound-footed women suffered immensely for their beauty, and nowhere more so than in the villages where labor was intensive. While the rich women could afford to lie like dolls upon their daybeds, the poor women had to work. Carrying water to the fields for farming is Chai's daily routine, and when she was young, she fetched as many as 18 buckets of water a day. Village women kept house and cooked, as well as farming, chopping wood, and weaving cloth. In the past, every household had a weaving machine, and during the hardest time of her life, Chai had to weave 1/2 meter of cloth every day. Aside from the pain, bound feet can also be very inconvenient. Mrs. Yang was born in 1911 and has witnessed the formation of the Republic of China, the Northern Warlords period, the Sino-Japanese War, as well as the formation of modern China under the communist regime. Over the years, she has suffered the loss of her husband and 4 children. For many years, she was the sole breadwinner of her family.
Nana 先生扶持我们久，那起码辛苦中嘛，我不晓教育不得了。
Since her mother died young, Mrs. Yang was given away as a child bride. The Republican Revolution propagated the idea of anti-feudalism. Foot binding was considered a legacy of the feudal system and was therefore outlawed. In May 1928, the Ministry of Internal Affairs announced a 3-month liberation period. Women aged between 15 and 30 with their feet bound must unbind them during the liberation period. In some areas, the local governments imposed fines on bound-footed women in the form of a sum of money or a certain quantity of oil. Some even forced women to publicly expose their deformed feet in an attempt to humiliate them. Many young women, unable to face the social pressure and humiliation, committed suicide. Ironically, in fact, the physical pain of unbinding bound feet was often as great as that of binding them.
打来缝不缝的嘛？过了没好过点嘛？过了没做过这个的嘛？你一下来干吃了就没得了嘛？分开吃了，你这脚要断了嘛？这个脚要断嘛？你分开见那个死他们就抬了嘛？脚要断，那一在路嘛，不过就没过路嘛，这个见那个死开了嘛？不就那生了嘛？这个脚要，这死他们见。 也轻轻地包了点，没缝了缝就缝大了嘛。
As China moved forward, the possession of golden lotus feet changed from a mark of honor to a stain of degradation. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was formally established by the Communist Party. In the new communist era, which espoused sex equality and where points for food were earned through hard physical work, women with bound feet were considered half-disabled. They were expected to work the same as the able-bodied women, or they would starve.
你过了就我们还不是跳头这那我们还不是跳划船我们还不是划，那人划轮船我们还是划轮船，这太慢上课啊！
找个过来。
那怎么靠工分吃饭的嘛？比工分不得饭吃了嘛？那做的工分得吃了嘛？
Mrs. Yang had 6 children. Her husband died when she was 36. After liberation in 1949, every household had to contribute to the labor force in order to earn labor points to exchange for food. Without her husband, Mrs. Yang now assumed the role of sole breadwinner, housekeeper, worker, and mother. Part of her job was to draw water from the dam, carrying it to over 50 workers repairing the roads in the village, thereby earning herself 5 labor points a day.
以前是说做大酒少数，大酒我们这五六个大酒，而且没，还不是跳脱大喊，还不喊人家高没，也没人看那么大呀，那个大，我们不地大体呀，那个不地大体没。 你得铺这个白一楼的嘛，我们走出来没得没铺白一楼啊，听的嘛不听说，他也不上课啊，不，听不课嘛不爱吃的嘛，那能吃啊？
In the hard years to follow, 4 of Mrs. Yang's 6 children died. Only the eldest daughter, Yang Jingshou, now 72, and the youngest son, Yang Zhaoshun, survived the hardship. 56-year-old Yang Zhaoshun recalls the terrible suffering.
生活比较艰苦。
怎么样苦啊？
因为老母亲的脚小，我是家小，苦不该吃。所以最后那个姐姐就是乱起，我都感觉生气，我自己也笑，一直到上这一步还是63年了，我自己长大了一点，坚持呢，小伙子在公分上了，自己会抢公分了。
到我家不把死的时候。 啊，手都是松懈了，我的妈，手都是松懈了。你做礼拜么？做礼3个，做礼拜么？你来年，你来起别人的人力气呢？
On the 5th of January 1970, An earthquake, 7.7 on the Richter scale, erupted in Liuyi village. 197 people were killed. The dead included 6 whole families. Over 500 villagers were injured, including Mrs. Yang.
那山里去吃啊，地下来那个，对吧？俺个心里喊起来，亲戚早点就下来，下来就堵了，这会把我们就打断了嘛，在那个打断了这个他那个皮了嘛。没开始是个山沟，有没上路啊？
Today, there are 5 living generations of the Yang family. Since China adopted its open-door policy, their lives have improved, and her son now generates income from farming. Mrs. Yang helps look after her grandchildren. In her spare time, she goes to the Association for the Elderly to practice Tai Chi or to dance with the other elderly people. 89-year-old Yang considers her little feet the greatest regret of her life.
啊，这些家伙适合那个么？再说你们口没办法蒙就看了，我挂就挂成你挂不快了嘛，就好。喜欢？谁吃呢？骨头也谁吃呢？你谁吃一摊？
32-year-old Lo Bin is a doctor at the only orthopedic clinic in Liuyi village. He learned how to treat bone fractures with Chinese herbal medicine at the age of 17. The elderly foot-bound women like to consult him for their foot problems. One of them is his 72-year-old grandmother, Mrs. Lo, who first had her feet bound at the age of 7. The X-ray shows that the bones of her instep and the joint have been deformed. The bones of the 4 toes have been bent under the ball of the foot. The instep and the sole of a normal foot form an angle of 20 to 30 degrees. But the instep of a foot-bound woman is deformed so that it bulges and forms a 60 to 80 degree angle with the sole. The heel bone has been brought into a near vertical position and closer to the toe bones.
小脚钢脚比这个正常的是少点的，一般脚的问题主要是韧带扭伤，一个是骨折。
Historical records reveal that at its peak, the custom of foot binding was followed even by Korean women and by people in the southwest and northwest of China, places inhabited by national minorities.
"在我们回族呢，中国的回族呢，一般是历代以来都有裹小脚的，这是仿效汉族的一种现象。可以说，这个呢，也是我们本民族的一种悲哀。
In the 13th century AD, the Mongolians mounted an invasion to the west, and as a result, many Muslims from Arab regions migrated to the Orient and settled in various provinces in China, forming the Hui people. The Hui are Muslims. This is Daiying near Yuxi City in Yunnan. 7 out of 12 villages here are Hui, where about 10 foot-bound Hui women are still alive today. One of them is 82-year-old Ma Yat-chen. Like the Han women, Ma Yat-chen first had her feet bound by her mother at the age of 3. The Hui usually chose to do the first binding for their daughters on Chinese New Year's Eve.
我们是回族 还一出门了活，姊妹5个，穿一个海洋。
Compared with the golden lotus shoes of the Han, their shoes are simpler and plainer.
孩子没事，我做呢，做你没事，还在做姑娘的活就做你了。
These socks were especially made for attending prayers in the mosque.
我们礼拜要洗脚，天进去没洗小净，洗小了，洗了嘛，这么洗推手。
The Muslim Hui take the attendance of prayers very seriously. As a devout Muslim, Mayat Chen prays at home 5 times a day and has done so without fail over the past 20 years. Before each service, she cleanses herself. The cleansing is divided into major and minor cleansing. The former refers to the cleansing of the whole body, while the latter refers to the cleansing of one's hands, face, feet, as well as one's private parts, following a strict order and frequency. What is particularly remarkable is that when the custom of foot binding was at its peak, even men who had advocated this cruel and inhuman practice fell victim to it. Historical records from between the Ming Dynasty and the Republican era reveal the practice of foot binding for men. Foot binding for men was particularly prevalent among upper-class homosexual men. Some uneducated lower-class parents believed that boys were prone to die young, so they would dress them like girls by having their feet bound and ears pierced. In this newspaper, dated the 19th of May 1931, or year 20 of the Republican era, there is a report of the arrest of a bound-footed man. The headline reads, "Old man with long hair and bound feet." It was reported that the man, named Ai Shaochun, was a native of Shandong. He had been dressed like a girl with long hair and his feet bound since childhood. It caused a sensation. "77-year-old Master Li has now retired, but he still teaches at the traditional Chinese opera school. In the feudal past, all the female roles in a Peking opera were played by men. Special props had to be used by men playing female roles to simulate the graceful manner of bound-footed women. During Emperor Qianlong's rule during the Qing dynasty, actors began using specially made wooden supports to conceal their feet.
我从8岁学戏，9岁我就学了这个刀马旦这一行，学了这一行以后呢，就绑球，一直到52年，我一直是绑球。
The wooden support measured 30 centimeters in length, with one end carved into a lotus foot form that was only 10 centimeters long. The remaining part of the support, starting from the heel, was carved into a splint used to hold the actor's own foot.
这两边呢是敲带子，这是敲板，后面是一个小垫儿。过去的 老师们都不用垫儿，很疼，所以我妈妈给我做了一个垫儿，好一点。
The actor had to tie the support tightly against the back of his leg. In this way, 1/3 of the actor's body weight fell on the flat base of the front end of the support, and the other 2/3 of his body weight was borne by the splint. Having done that, the actor would then put on a pair of lotus shoes, thus creating a pair of tiny, false feet.
就是刚练的时候，它是这样，啊，1、2、3，这样一来就不行了，必须绷直。这绷直的话呢，也许不是什么的，这人没下长多高了，它不一样啊。
According to Master Li, learning to walk with the wooden supports was a painful experience. Pupils had to put on the supports at 8 a.m. and keep them on for the next 12 hours, even when their legs became swollen or injured.
必须是小步伐，平稳一些，脚的力量很大。
The supports were worn for 1 year while the student learned to walk with them and to stand still on bricks while their master timed them with sticks of burning incense. Only after going through all this special training could an actor start to learn how to play a female role and to simulate the seductive manner of a bound-footed woman.
冻的这个很冷，在夏天它呢很热，它老绑上它又热的很，所以真的它要是一不舒服的时候，一疼了，一般的是疼的原因就是什么？这个脚腕子这会儿酸，它一勒得很紧，那么这样有时候把手掐一掐它，就把这个叫什么这么挤一挤，因为它绑得紧吧。 把它挤一挤，它叫它好像叫它血脉啊，叫它通一通，好像就稍微舒服点儿。
哎呀，那花，多花嘛，你做球一点，做多花一点。那个噶，我做点小球吧。做点小球一点。给你钱是干那个？
In the past, bound-footed women would make their own embroidered lotus shoes. But now that they are old, the small-footed women in Liu Yi village ask 68-year-old Shun Peishan to make shoes for them.
小妹学校现在是30岁就修了，小妹老店都一开始修，真是那个呢。
Embroidered lotus shoes played an important role in the culture of foot binding. Every stage, measuring, cutting, drawing of embroidery patterns and stitching, was carefully carried out. Exquisitely made miniature embroidered shoes gave women's tiny deformed feet an attractive appearance that fascinated many men.
我认为我总觉得我手上的鞋子都美的，但是相对比较最好的美的，那么像这双鞋子呢是比较好看。
63-year-old Yang Xiaorong is a Shanghainese antique and artifact collector. Both his grandmother and mother had bound feet. He collected his first lotus shoe in 1980. In the 20 years since, he has traveled throughout China and expanded his collection to 780 pairs. Lotus shoes, also known as arched shoes, apart from being tiny and pointed, have to be crooked and high-heeled. The sole of the shoe is bent to form an arch, and the heel is thick to support the body's weight. The height of the shoe heel varied in different periods. Mr. Yang's collection, From winter lotus shoes to lotus shoes worn at funerals, demonstrates the different aspects of the lives of bound-footed women. Each embroidery pattern has different symbolism.
譬如讲是，牡丹呢是富贵意思，譬如桃子啊什么是长寿的意思啊，石榴是那个多姿多彩意思。这个还有一定的比较长寿的意思。那么前面的蝙蝠，我们知道福是福气的意思。这个鞋子呢是上面用具，它的鸡呢上面用具有鸡冠了。 它鸡冠的意思呢，就是我们升官发财这个意思。
这会好多这些人往前，但是，80、90岁的了，70岁以上呢，70岁以下能别了小脚嘛。
Master He is retired. He is not making ordinary leather shoes, but tiny ones for bound-footed women. These tiny leather shoes were very popular during the late Qing period and the early Republican era.
有7个，从22到28，是麻子小脚皮，他们都小，几一件他们难做。
Master He started to make golden lotus shoes 30 years ago. He was renowned amongst the bound-footed women for the comfort and hard-wearing qualities of his shoes. In his best years, he sold between 200 and 300 pairs. However, with the ever-diminishing number of customers in recent years, the demand is now close to zero. As a result, his shoe factories have closed one after another.
这个但是80、90岁、70、80岁的老人都活不得几年了，做来是赚了，没就别人做了之后。
At present, there are only 104 tiny-footed old ladies in Luyi village, and the number lessens year by year. Nevertheless, they never fail to attend the annual foot-bathing ceremony held at the Three Religions Temple on the Pig's Day in the lunar calendar. According to a folk tale, there were once 3 dragon brothers who each transformed themselves into a different pool. But the youngest brother, who transformed himself into the dragon pool at the Three Religions Temple, was fascinated by women's small feet. In order to satisfy this obsession, he played a trick on the bound-footed women, causing their feet to ache. As a result, they came to the temple from far and wide to bathe their feet in him to relieve the pain. These bound-footed women believe firmly in the significance of this event. Having burned incense and chanted scriptures inside the temple, they now go to the dragon pool outside the temple to solemnly wash their feet. Once an erotic symbol of beauty and eligibility, the bound foot for the modern audience now represents subjugation and mutilation. But as the curtain falls on an era that spanned no less than a millennium, history confronts us with a custom that should perhaps be viewed not merely as a sign of men's oppression of women, but more as a realization, brutal and disfiguring, of male and female desire and display. As these, the last bound-footed women in China, contemplate the irony of their lives, first esteemed, then reviled, they now find themselves as the object of curiosity once more. The last vestiges of an ancient custom shrouded in mystery and mystique. sensuality and torment.